On behalf of Namita Gokhale, William Dalrymple, and all my colleagues at Teamwork Arts, welcome back to JLF's Brave New World Season 2. Our magazine partner for this series is The Week, Journalism with a Human Touch. Our first session of the day is Into the Heart of the Himalayas, Jono Lineen in conversation with Prajwal Parajuly. A solo trek over 2,700 kilometers through the Himalayas, undertaken after the death of his brother, led author Jono Lineen through a spiritual journey across the mountainous terrain of Pakistan, Ladakh, and India. His voyage became a cathartic experience of self-discovery and an important tool in overcoming profound grief. In conversation with Prajwal Parajuly, Lineen presents a vivid narrative of life and death and the enduring power of the human spirit. Jono Lineen is a curator at the National Museum of Australia. Dr. Lineen spent over 20 years traveling the world, working as a forester, deep-sea fisher, geologist, ski racer, mountain guide, humanitarian relief worker, and a writer. His books include Into the Heart of the Himalayas and Perfect Motion. Prajwal Parajuly hails from the former Himalayan kingdom of Sikkim. The Gurkha's Daughter, his best-selling collection of short stories, was a finalist for the Dylan Thomas Prize in the UK and a semi-finalist for the Story Prize in the United States. Land Where I Flee, his first novel, was longlisted for the Émile Guimet Prize and the First Novel Prize in France. He was on the jury of the 2018 Dylan Thomas Prize. As you're all aware, all our sessions are available to view on our Facebook page, JLF Lit Fest, and on our YouTube channel, Jaipur Lit Fest JLF. In case any of you drop off due to bandwidth issues, you can find us on our YouTube channel, Jaipur Lit Fest JLF. And of course, if we drop off, hang in there, we'll be right back. Ladies and gentlemen, into the heart of the Himalayas, Jono Lineen in conversation with Prajwal.
Thank you, Sanjoy. I've spent the last 2 days devouring every word of Jono Lineen's Into the Heart of the Himalayas. I have marveled at his resolve to walk more than 2,500 kilometers of some of the world's most beautiful, if inhospitable, terrain. Lineen undertakes the walk to help make sense of his brother Garrett's death. Thoughts: Garrett died in a rowing accident a day before his 19th birthday. And his thoughts are always in Jono's mind as he traverses through what he calls the Muslim Himalayas, the Hindu Himalayas, and the Buddhist Himalayas. Into the Heart of the Himalayas is exquisitely written and vividly rendered, and just the book you want to read when the world is going nuts and you want to stay sane. It is a meditation on life, death, and acceptance. Jono, it is an absolute pleasure to be in conversation with you. Welcome.
Oh, wow. Prajwal, thanks for that beautiful introduction.
Thank you for writing the book, Jono. Let's start by talking a bit about Garrett, your brother, and why you undertook the walk. You grew up in Belfast and on Vancouver Island. How did a brother's tragic death bring about a long walk halfway around the world?
Yeah. Well, my brother Gareth was younger than me. He was 2 years younger. So he was the baby of the family. You know, in Ireland we would have called him the wee man. And him and I were quite close. You know, of course, as teenagers, we had lots of fights. We had lots of heated discussions. But him and I had spent time together working in the forest in northern Canada, and that had kind of forged this a relationship, you know, in some ways built on adversity. So his death, of course, was completely unexpected and incredibly tragic for the family. You know, my parents split up after Gareth died. I mean, it showed all of these fault lines that had been there for many years and no one could really picture. So, you know, when he died, a lot of things happened. Like I said, my family kind of split apart in a way. At the same time, I was a full-time ski racer in Europe. I'd been training for the Olympics. And actually, 2 days before his death, I was told that I wouldn't get to ski the race that I was supposed to race in the Olympics. I would go there as a reserve. And that was incredibly frustrating for someone who had trained and devoted their life for 10 years in a particular sport. And then, of course, Gareth was gone, and Gareth was a key component of that puzzle that was my perception of family. So in the space of a week there, my life fell apart in a way. And that really led to 2 years of what I would call now a downward spiral, sex and drugs and booze, and really no long-term thinking. In a lot of ways, I'd lost a lot of faith. I'd lost faith in some ways in the future. I'd lost faith in humanity, because, these things, Gareth's death was so completely unexpected. I mean, how could I even imagine what would be happening tomorrow, never mind 2 years from now? And in a lot of ways, I also lost faith in myself because, of course, I'd been a professional ski racer and I hadn't completed on my final goal. But at the same time, I was drinking a lot, and I was losing self-respect. So all of this kind of combined to create, as I said, a downward spiral. And really, when I got to the bottom of that spiral, it was a dream from my childhood that started to pull me out of it. And that dream was related to when we were kids growing up in Belfast in Northern Ireland. And every Saturday, my mom used to take us down to the local library. And we loved that trip because that's when, of course, this is a long time before Netflix or Apple TV or anything. We would go to the library and get our books for the week. And I would always choose a couple of kids' mysteries, like Hardy Boys or Alfred Hitchcock. And then I would gravitate towards the section that had the mountaineering books in it. And I don't know why that was. I just had this fascination with those books, and those books always had that photo insert in the center of the book, and in there would be pictures of men and women way up in the Himalayas, Kanchenjunga, Amadablam, Everest, Annapurna, Nanda Devi, all of these mountains, people up there on these peaks in these puffy, bright jackets, surrounded by titanium white snow and these incredible peaks flowing off into the distance, and above them just this crystal clear sky. And that was completely the opposite to the Belfast that I was growing up in, because Belfast at that time was immersed in a civil war, what was called the Troubles. And Belfast is a rainy place. It's an old industrial city, so you had gray skies and gray buildings and the soldiers in the streets all wearing khaki uniforms. And there I would go to the library and open up this book and see this image of transcendence in a way, because these men and women were above the clouds. They were moving towards the heaven with purposes. And so I always had this dream in the back of my mind about the Himalayas. And as I said, when I reached the bottom of that downward spiral, the dream came back, and I decided that I wanted to go to the Himalayas and try and find that dream again. And so I was very fortunate. I had a good job as a forester in Canada. So I saved up my money and I got onto an Air India flight from Vancouver to Delhi. And then I got on a bus and a train and I arrived in Ladakh. And I tell you, that place did not disappoint. I went there for one season of trekking because people had told me about this place, and I went for one season of trek, and I ended up spending 8 years there in the Himalayas. And I guess, Prajwal, your original question is, why did I undertake this trek? And the truth is that As I said, I spent a lot of time in the Himalayas and India, and I was really immersed in the culture and the religion, especially in Ladakh. And I was a young guy, you know, I was in my 30s, I was full of ego, I was strong, I was fit. And I thought back again to those climbers in the books from my childhood. And I thought, I want to be one of those guys. I want to be the first guy to walk from Pakistan to Nepal through the Western Himalayas. And so, you know, that was, of course, the superficial reason why I undertook this trek. But I think you know from reading the book, Prajwal, that the way it developed was completely different.
Yeah, completely different. It's a fascinating account. I loved every page of it, and I will reread it. You know, Jono, I come from the Himalayas myself. My dad's family comes from Kalimpong near Darjeeling. My mom comes from Nepal. I grew up in Sikkim, and I trek a fair bit myself. But I've never trekked the Himalayas alone. You chose to do it by yourself. Is there a reason for it?
Wow, that's an interesting question, Prajwal, because trekking solo is a very, very different experience than trekking in a group. In a group, you have some sense of security. There's people there who, you know, if you fall down, people will come and find you. They'll come and get you. You know, if you get into the camp in the evening and you're really tired, your friends will help set up your tent and get the camp ready. When you're alone, you have to be completely reliant on yourself. But at the same time, you are very, very reliant on the people that you come in contact with. And as I said, I've been in the Himalayas for a few years, and I love the people in the Himalayas. You know, I'd learned so much from them. And one of my initial purposes in the trek was to try and connect those cultures in some way. And I had a lot of, you know, I had a lot of friends throughout the mountains, so I felt confident in doing that. You have to be a very confident trekker to undertake a trek like that on your own. And what I found was that by being on my own, when I came into a village, I was, you know, I wasn't a threat in any way. I was someone who needed help. And not that I asked for help, but the hospitality and the compassion of the people right across the Himalayas is such that I would show up in a village in Zanskar or Garhwal, and within 5 minutes, people would be offering me a cup of tea. Within 10 minutes, people would be saying, oh, no, stay at our house. You know, you can stay in our kitchen, or you can stay in our shed. And that was actually very liberating for me, because as I said, you know, in the aftermath of Gareth's death, I'd lost a lot of faith. I'd lost a lot of faith in humanity. And the compassion and the hospitality of the people across the Himalayas helped get rid of that negative feeling that I'd had in my mind since Gareth died. So trekking alone requires a lot of confidence, but it also requires you to be extremely open. And that's probably the biggest reasons why I wanted to do it that way.
Were there moments during the trek where you regretted having done it alone, when you wish there was some kind of companionship around you?
Well, the very first night, I have to say, you know, I was in Pakistan, and I was walking out of Gilgit, and well, I was walking up towards Nanda Devi from Gilgit. No, actually, I think it was the second or the third night when I was in my tent. I was all alone. There was a lot of army around, because we're talking about an area close to the border. And I was extremely nervous at that point, not because of the local people, but because of the military around. And that was probably the only time that I had second thoughts about it. And other than that, no. It was a beautiful experience because it forced me to be open, to be vulnerable. And I think that's a real key. I mean, we know that as writers, Prajwal, you know, you have to be vulnerable. You have to be open. And to make a piece of work, a piece of writing that's worthwhile reading, you have to be able to get that down on this page, that vulnerability. And I think people connect to that. People connect to that vulnerability, not just in the villages in the Himalayas, but in the books also.
Absolutely. You know, Jonah, perhaps that's one of the reasons you've had so many incredible experiences on this trek. There are innumerable of them, but one that strikes me as particularly poignant was your encounter with a mummified llama. Could you tell our viewers a little bit about that?
Yeah, that was a big surprise to me also. You know, there's a tradition in Tibetan Buddhism where, you know, a high master, a realized lama, their bodies are actually mummified and left in that state of repose, and usually left in the area where they might have been deeply engaged in their practice. So I was actually walking in Spiti, and around about Tabo, I started to hear rumors about a mummified lama in a village called Gyu, which is right up very close to the Tibetan border. And of course, I thought, well, this is something that I really want to see. I've never seen an Egyptian mummy, never mind a Tibetan mummy. So I arrived in Gyu, of course, on my own. I went into a local house there. They offered me tea. We sat down, and I asked them, where is the lama? And they pointed to what was basically a shed across the fields. And after tea, I walked over there, and I went into the shed. It was extremely windy that day, and I remember going inside, and all of a sudden the wind had calmed down, and I went into this small room, and in the center of it, in a glass case, was this mummified lama. And it really took my breath away. I mean, it still takes my breath away when I think about it. And I looked at him, and then I sat down beside him, and it was a really beautiful thing, because the lama had obviously died in a position of meditation. He was in a lotus position, and he still had his mala, his beads, in his hand, and his face was really beautiful. I mean, it was so peaceful. It was so obvious that he had passed from this world in a state of real beatitude, real peace. And I remembered at that point, when I was looking at the lama, that when I'd been to see Gareth's body in the hospital morgue in Canada, he also had a half a smile on his face. And that was a sense of great comfort for me. It was a sense of feeling that he hadn't left this life in a painful state or in any hurt. And actually, you know, he died of hypothermia. And in hypothermia, supposedly, when your body temperature starts to drop to those low temperatures, you actually go into a dream state. So the beautiful thought for me was that, yes, he had gone into that dream state, but it had been a good dream. And of course, my hope was that the dream was about myself and my siblings and mom and dad and all of us together. And I think that's why he had that beautiful half smile on his face. And the lama, of course, brought that back to me. And of course, incredibly, you know, as a realized lama, his purpose in life would have been to forward those teachings, to help people out of suffering. And that's exactly what that lama was doing, even in that state that he was in Gyu.
That's powerful, Jonah. You know, when you talk about Gareth in the book, I've noticed that there is an undercurrent of guilt There's this guilt for not having given your younger brother the time of day, for not having had much patience with him, in a way that an older sibling doesn't have much time for a younger one. Have you made peace with that now? Where do you stand in your thoughts about Garrett, and how much of the walk helped you come to that place?
Well, yeah, let's start with guilt. I think most people who have siblings may have a little bit of guilt about how they treated each other in teenagehood. I'm a father. I have two sons, and they fight all the time. And sometimes when they have a particularly vociferous argument, I will take them aside and I will say, you only have one brother. Treat them with respect. And of course, that's going back to my memories of Gareth, because there were times when I didn't treat him with the respect that he deserved. Now, my older brother and I, of course, are best friends now. And I'm sure that if Gareth is alive, then of course we would be great friends too. And the frustration and the guilt that I have around that is, of course, that Gareth's time was cut short so tragically, and we never had time to, completely work through all those teenage dilemmas. So yeah, so there's still a little bit of guilt there. But what the walk did for me was give me the ability to look at Gareth in so many different ways. Now, Prajwal, you've read the book, and you know that Gareth is through the book all the way. And that's intentional, but it didn't happen in the first drafts. I had to get there. I had to get to the point where I realized that Gareth was a key component of this story. I mean, incredible that actually occurred, that I couldn't get it off the start. But when I did realize that, then of course, Gareth became that component that I was able to look at again and again. And so many of those magical experiences that occur in the book do have resonances and echoes with experiences that I've had with Gareth earlier. So I think, the key for me is that the walk in a way was a very long darshan with Gareth in a way. I was able to look at him the way that some people might look at, a statue of Shiva, or look at the mountains in a particular way. Gareth was with me all the time, and I could look at him from many different angles and many different directions and get a more complete idea of what he was for me when he wasn't alive anymore. And so, interestingly, of course, I didn't completely realize that during the walk, and even right after the walk. It took me many years to kind of get to that stage where, of course, as I said, Gareth became the key component of the story.
Very long darshan with Gareth. That's beautiful. Jono, I would love for you to read a short extract from the book. I would love for our viewers to get a taste of how mellifluously written the book is. So, a few short paragraphs.
No, my pleasure. My pleasure, Prajwal. I'll just read a short section from when I arrived at Galmuk, at the source of the Ganga. This was an incredible day for me. It still comes back to me all the time. And it's because I was, I'd been in Gangotri, and I'd met some sadhus there, and I stayed with them for a day, and then I wanted to go farther up, of course, to the source. And I remember it was a long day, one day to get up to Galmuk, and I was arriving there just as the sun was setting. And any of the viewers who have been to Galmuk know that, of course, the glacier sits there. On either side are these incredible ice peaks. And then, of course, Ganga emanates from the base of the glacier. And when I was arriving, as I said, the sun was going down. So the sky was actually going through those sunset colors, you know, through copper and ruby and then coral. And I was probably a couple of kilometers away from the actual glacier, and I could see the face of the glacier there. And it was a turquoise color that glacial ice gets in some lights. So there was the coral in the sky and the turquoise of the glacier. And a lot of the viewers will know that those are actually the protective stones that every Tibetan child receives when they're born. Tibetans always wear a coral and a turquoise, representative of the landscape. And so in a way, I felt like I was moving into a landscape of protection, a landscape that would accept me for who I was, you know, a broken individual, a man with a lot of ego, a person searching for something he wasn't quite sure of. And I arrived just as the sun set behind those peaks. And this is what I wrote about it. I sat down on a freezing beach at 4,000 meters. The stream an arm's length away. My shirt and fleece vest were soaked with sweat, but I was satisfied with where I was. I crossed my legs and stilled my breath until it was soundless. I sat and sat. I felt a warmth rise up my spine. There was a tingle on my eyelids as tears welled up and stumbled down my cheeks, falling to the sand. The water of me was absorbed by the earth and taken back by Mother Ganga. My brother had been taken by water, and now I was sitting at the source. The source. Gareth's death was a source of fear for me, fear of not deriving the most out of life, and at the same time, a source of fearlessness in my drive to transcend that. But his death was also an inspiration for trust, because to get the most out of my many experiences, I had to trust the people and the land I came in contact with. I went to the edge of the infant Ganga. I sat back on my haunches and leaned over. Riverstones glinted in the moonlight. I scooped a handful of water so cold my fingers burned and drank it. The water was in me. I get pins and needles just reading that section again, Prajwal.
It's profound. It's amazing. Hey, what? What is it about walking, Jono, that makes us wiser, that makes problems go away, that makes us better people? Could you talk about that a bit?
Yeah, sure. Because this book actually sent me on a trajectory now for almost the past decade. I've been fascinated by that relationship between walking and creativity and storytelling, which are, you know, three intrinsic elements to who we are as human beings. You know, when we talk about wisdom, what is wisdom? You know, wisdom is it's not really book knowledge. You know, wisdom is actually about adaptability. The strength of Homo sapiens, the strength of us human beings, is our ability to adapt to changing environments. That's why we are here on this planet as, for better or worse, the dominant species, because we've adapted to environments around us and drawn the best out of those. And walking is intrinsic to that. We go back 4 million years to our first ancestors who stood up on two legs. And one of them saw a piece of golden fruit. They stood up, they walked towards that, they pulled that piece of golden fruit down, they saw another piece 3 steps away, and they went towards that. That was the first time that we got up on 2 feet. And what it did was it liberated up a whole strata of resources. And you know, the group who was hanging around with that ancestor 4 million years ago, some of them would have looked at her and gone, she's crazy. Look what she just did. You know, she's done everything wrong. Other people would have looked at her and gone, wow, look what she just did. She opened up an entire area of resources that we can now utilize. So walking right there indicates the start of creativity. Now, when we follow through on that, we realize that the more and more that we started to walk, of course, what happened was what had been forepaws were transformed into hands, and those hands became the mediums through which we could create stone tools. And stone tools are the first physical evidence of creativity in human beings. So right there, we have this very long relationship between walking, bipedalism, and creativity. And that relationship took a huge leap forward about 2.5 million years ago when human beings got an appetite for protein. And when we got that appetite for protein, of course, we realized that the most concentrated forms of protein are animals. And so we developed long-range hunting techniques, because the only physical advantage that bipedal Homo erectus had over other four-legged animals is heat dissipation. Crazy when you think about it, but the way that we hunt animals without firearms is by walking them to exhaustion. We can outwalk just about any other animal through the savanna or the forest. Sometimes it takes days. Now, think about that. These group hunting techniques were developed with, 12 to 20 people walking across the savanna in communication the whole time, but not necessarily physical spoken communication. That means that we developed this almost a nonverbal type of communication between everybody in the group, but also between the good hunters and the animals. If you want to track an animal across the savanna, you have to think like an animal. You have to transcend yourself. You have to get out of your own body and think like what you are hunting. And that's the same way that we approach difficult problems today. If you want to solve a problem, you can't go about it the same old way. You have to think out of it in a new light. You have to get out of yourself. And the way that we can do that is the same way that our ancestors did that 2.5 million years ago, by going for a walk. And that's why so many artists, business people, politicians, philosophers, writers, thinkers of all types talk about how their best ideas have come to them when they've been out for a walk. We go back to Aristotle walking in the Pediteria in Rome. You think about Descartes walking around France. You think about Wordsworth walking through the Lakes District in England. You think about Einstein walking in the hills above Zurich and Bern. You think about Darwin. Darwin actually had a sand track built around his house in Kent so he could walk there every day and think about what he was writing. Virginia Woolf, probably some of the best contemporary artists right now are all engaged in walking as part of their process. And the reasons for that are because it makes us think differently. So creativity and walking are intimately linked. When we go for a walk, we actually become more creative. Now, the other side to this is that walking is deeply engaged with storytelling. And storytelling for us as human beings is so important. We don't frame our lives as, a spreadsheet. We don't frame our lives as, as a set of numbers that the accountant gives. You frame your life as a story. That's why, and in India, of course, it's so apparent. I mean, you go back to the Mahabharata, and you go back to these great legends that still today people are using as guides for the way that they're going to live their lives. Now, where does this come from? Why are human beings storytellers, and why are stories so important to us? Do birds tell stories? Do lions tell stories? We don't think so. Now, if we go back 100,000 years, a couple of major cognitive leaps happened for human beings. Number one was that we gained spoken language. Prior to that, we communicated using body language and kind of grunts. All of a sudden, we had this capacity to create a spoken language that was much more nuanced and flexible. We think that the reason this developed is because around about the same time we gained what's called symbolic thought. And symbolic thought is the idea that you can look at an object and realize it for more than what it initially presents as. So for example, a great example would be in Christianity, the cross. There's two pieces of wood stuck together. People who are practicing Christians will look at those two pieces of wood and be able to imagine an entire theology based upon those two pieces of wood. It's an incredible gift. It's a superhuman power. And that only started to develop about 100,000 years ago. Now, at the same time, as these two cognitive leaps developed, human beings, well, Homo sapiens actually, were forced out of East Africa. Now, Homo sapiens at that point in time were a very small species. There was only, estimates have between 5 and 20,000 of them. And climate change forced them to leave East Africa because the resources were becoming limited. And so they set off on this cross-continental journey. And Homo sapiens, us, spent the next 75,000 years wandering around the globe and settling everywhere where there was the possibility to create food, to create security. So, you know, why is it that the most popular, the most enduring, the most flexible narrative structure that we have today is the journey narrative? If you think about all of those films are actually based around what we call the hero's journey. It's the idea of moving off in a particular direction, facing obstacles along the way, overcoming those obstacles, learning from that and integrating that knowledge back into your own person, reaching the center, achieving your goal, and then coming back out and then transporting and disseminating that wisdom to your community. That is the story. Now, why is that story so important? It's because it's the story of us as Homo sapiens. We started out on that 75,000 year cross-continental migration. We faced obstacles. We overcame obstacles. We learned from that, and we learned from that, and we learned from that. That's what human beings do. We're creative. I describe human beings as bipedal problem solvers. That's what we are. And so when you go for a walk, not only do you become more creative, but you actually reconnect with that incredible story of Homo sapiens, the story of us, the story of overcoming. So for me, walking is a superpower.
You know, walking is meditation to a lot of people, and listening to you has been a meditative experience for me, as is reading your book. I have just received my cue that we'll have to wind up the session soon. I could go on listening to you for another few hours, but let us finish the session with a couple of questions here. You seem to have survived on rice and dal during a trek. Could you do that again? And would you do the trek again?
Well, first of all, I love rice and dal. I will say that right now. I make rice and dal at home all the time. My kids eat rice and dal, so I do like rice and dal.
No chutney, nothing. Just rice and dal. Khichdi.
Well, on the trek, yeah, there was no chutney. At home, there is chutney.
Okay.
And pickle. Now, would I do the trek again? I would love to. But saying that, you know, that trek involved a I was walking 30 to 40 kilometers a day, every day, in, out, with a 20-kilo pack on my back, most of it between 3,000 and 4,000 meters. So that is a pretty tough ask. So I would like to do it again, but I would have to take at least twice as long to do it now. And I have to say that, I still have lots of friends up in Ladakh. So what I would like to do is actually talk to them and say, hey, let's do this together. And then, we would do it as a group. And of course, it would be completely different then, because as I said earlier, when you're trekking alone, solo, it opens up the world to you. But I learned so much from the trek that in a way I wouldn't want to do it the same way again, because I'd be worried. I'd be worried that I might spoil that memory in some way.
It's a very, very good way of looking at it, Jono. Could you possibly show us the jacket of the book? I've read the book. I read it in ebook form. That is Into the Heart of the Himalayas, viewers, published in India by Speaking Tiger Books, in Australia by Melbourne University Press. Do read it, do buy it, do harass Jono with questions after you've read it. And thank you for this excellent section. Thank you for your great book. I hope our paths cross soon, Jono. Thank you so much.
Oh, Prajwal, thank you so much. And thanks to JLF. This has been a real pleasure and an honor. And definitely, I hope that we meet again, Prajwal.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jono. Thank you, Prajwal, for that beautiful conversation about the Himalayas, about heartbreak, and about healing and man's endurance. Thank you all for watching and being such a great audience. We're sorry we couldn't take any questions from you today. And we hope you enjoyed this conversation. We'll log back on at 8:30 p.m. for our next session on JLF's Brave New World, Chosen Spirits, Samit Basu, in conversation with Dipanjanan Pal. In a fraught world of climate change, 24-hour surveillance, and the degeneration of the public and private self, author and screenwriter Samit Basu's most recent book, Chosen Spirits, paints a disturbing picture of present realities. The book was shortlisted for the 2020 JCB Prize for Literature. Meanwhile, given the large-scale need for financial assistance in the cultural sector, Teamwork Fine Arts Society is curating a multi-arts charity event, I Believe Art Matters, on 4th of October, starting 5 p.m. The initiative aims to raise financial support and resources for artists and artisans and celebrate their craft and tradition by bringing their stories to the forefront. I Believe Art Matters is being hosted by actor Shabana Azmi and Manoj Bajpai and will premiere on Facebook and on YouTube. They will weave together performances for approximately 5 hours with over 450 featured artists, including A.R. Rahman, Salim Suleiman, Shekhar Rabjiani and the Shillong Chamber Choir, Dr. L. Subramaniam, Kailash Kher, Raghu Dikshit, Indian Ocean, Shabnam Virmani, Advaita, Usha Uttab, Selva Ganesh, Shivamani, Viku Vinayak Ram, and so many more. Please remember to log on at 5 p.m. on 4th of October, Sunday. Meanwhile, look forward to seeing you at 8:30 p.m. Indian Standard Time for the next session of JLF's Brave New World.